Hey guys, and welcome to this first in a series of tutorials where we're going to look at how to use AI to build your own tools. So if you're here, it's because you are interested in the power of AI, and maybe you've heard about people are starting to build things for themselves to use to solve problems that they're having, and that you can get stuff done in a matter of minutes that used to take several hours to do. So you're in the right place. And through these videos, I want to give you little snippets of the top tips and tools that you need to be able to make your own stuff, going from making the most basic email templates to PDFs to whole proposals to whole applications, if we get that far. So just to get started today, it's super basic beginner stuff. So if you know this, apologies. But if you don't, this is going to be a good introduction to, if I can share my screen, to the world of AI creation. So you may have already used AI to create things just by having a conversation with Claude or with ChatGPT. In this series, I'm going to be using Claude because that's, at the moment, in my opinion, being a professional using this every day, I think Claude is the best at precision and reliability in terms of creating tools. So that's why I use it. Other tools I have used, and I've tried all of them, except for Grok, and I'm not really satisfied with anything except for Claude when it comes to making things professionally. You can sign up to Claude for free. I'm not getting any commission from Claude. It's really just genuinely the tool that I like to use. So getting started with the concept of, should I just go in here and stare into the void of the how can I help you and just explain all the problems that I have? I wouldn't just start with a conversation. What I would start with is an idea. So to say, for example, I'll give you an example of an ex-client who's contacted me recently who wants to explore the possibility of recreating an app that he has in another coding platform that he's had for years, and he has customers. He would like to explore the possibility of moving that into a coded app. So a tool that he can deploy and give to his customers that he actually owns, rather than it being owned by some other company like Wix or Squarespace or something like that. So the first thing that I did for him was to get into the project space. So I have all sorts of weird and wonderful projects, so please no judgment. And the project that I created for him was this one. Why a project? Because it gives you a space to give context to Claude and to an AI. There's projects in ChatGPT as well, if that's your preferred tool. There are also projects in there with the same concept. But it gives one unique space that Claude has to understand your problem in full, with several different parts. So when you create a project for whatever problem that you have, you just have to give it a name. It doesn't really matter what the name and the description is. The most important thing is the file section. So this section at the right here, where we can add all sorts of stuff. We can upload things from the computer, PDFs, Excel files, Word documents, even code, if that's your thing. Anything you want, or even just text. Just upload something like it could be an explanation of the problem that you're having, or a brief, like a scope about whatever the problem is that you're having, just to get it started. The idea is to give Claude a library of stuff that it can access if and when it needs it. So then you have a conversation with it and say, I want to scope out this project for my client. Then I started this, by the way, with just these screenshots of the current application that the client is using, because Claude can see things as well. So I gave it screenshots and explained in the conversation the scope of the project first. Then at the end of that conversation, so I started with Claude saying, these are the things that the client currently has. This is what he wants to do. Claude starts explaining what we might be able to do to solve that. And then at the end of it, I asked it to make documentation that explains the app specification, what technical solutions we need, and it also added on AI integration because that's something I asked for, and a way to give the client independence from developers in the future. I also asked it to make a guide for the client because I knew that the documentation it's creating for me is going to be quite technical. So I asked it to make another doc for the client that I could send to him to explain in more basic language what I'm proposing to do. And then when I did that, so let's take the app specification, for example. When I did that, and I'm happy with that, I wasn't happy at first, I don't think. I pushed back on a couple of issues, and that's another thing that you really need to get into the brain space of doing is when Claude pitches documents or solutions, it's not always the right thing the very first time. You really need to look at it, study it, give Claude your feedback on it, and let Claude have a second go, because it can go into the documents it's created and make tweaks. It doesn't have to reproduce every single document. It can tweak the ones it already has, so it's not using a lot of tokens. It's not going to blow your limit for the day. And then once you're happy with it, click on the document that's obviously going to give really good context in future conversations. Click here next to copy and click add to project. So when you do that, when you go back to your project page, then that document will appear in the list of files. So that second conversation you have, where maybe you want to dig a bit deeper into a specific issue, Claude has those documents as context. So every time it has a conversation with you, it'll understand from that context. If you want to make sure that's the case, use the instructions. So instructions are for all conversations that happen within this project. Put in something like before answering, you must have read all technical documentation in the project files. You can add to this and add lots of different instructions, but that would be one instruction to make sure every time you talk to it, it reads these 4 files. And then the other things it'll read if and when it needs it. But that's a great way to start and then continue the conversation with Claude. Is every conversation you're adding more files into this. And the more you add into here, the more context it gets, the more it will be able to answer you reliably and precisely. So that's normally where I start from. Another point about this, when you're doing the initial documentation, I would recommend, like, let's say not documentation, because it sounds like you're going to make an app. Let's say you're just trying to get a better way to process CSV files for your job. Start when you are asking it to make documentation and to understand the issue, maybe like to analyze your existing CSV file, start the conversation with Opus. So this conversation is already in Opus. Let's say you want to start a new one. Sorry. Click on where it says Sonnet or Opus and switch it between Sonnet or Opus. Opus is the one to use when you have a big think to do, if that's a word. So you needed to study a whole CSV file. You need to study a 20-page document before it gets started. You need it to produce a whole bunch of documentation or a really complex solution. Put it in Opus to get started with, to make the documentation. Have that conversation, because Opus is taking up more tokens, but producing much more deeply thought out answers. So get the documentation really deeply thought out, then switch to Sonnet, for example. If you've done your documentation of how to better process CSV files, then switch to Sonnet for the next conversation where you say, hey, I have a CSV, let's process it the way that we agreed we're going to do, and just use Sonnet. Sonnet's great for just executing tasks as long as there's no big thinking involved. It's perfect for following instructions and executing the task the way it's supposed to and having a very precise answer. You don't lose any precision. You only lose the kind of big, I can see through the universe type model, which is Opus. And soon we're going to have Mythos apparently as well, which is going to be even more than that. But make sure you switch before starting, because if you're accidentally using Opus, you wouldn't notice, but you would be sucking out more tokens for nothing, because it would be doing basic work that you don't need Opus for. So that would be another recommendation for getting started. But this is essentially setting up the foundation that you're going to use for everything else you're going to do in the tutorials that I'm going to give you. Everything that I do starts with a Claude project. It starts with Opus, thinking through really deeply the problem that I'm trying to solve, producing documentation that I add to the files, and then switching to Sonnet and just coasting through all the solutions that I want to make. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you in the next one.